Alright, we're getting pretty close to finishing the character. Not really, but we're getting pretty far along. So let's get started with the skirt. I like starting big areas first because when I color in smaller areas, then it's a lot easier to do that. So I was imagining that her skirt would actually be pink and maybe a bit of black. However, I want the black to be kind of bold. And the reason being is because I want the ends of the skirt to kind of, since her boots are going to be pink, I want to make sure that there's a little bit of contrast. So it's not pink on pink, but it's black on pink. So I'm going to take a 1, just kind of thick. I'm just going to be adding a little bit of decoration on her skirt. So I'm just going to be adding some stripes. So I'm going to add a kind of a bolder line up here. This will also create contrast for the leg area here. Make sure you follow the lines here. Follow the direction. If you want, you can draw the border part first. Let me zoom in a bit. So you want to make sure that the folds or the detail also go along with the shape of the fold. So notice how I made a turning edge here and made another bump. That's because the fold's doing that. It's not just straight on, it's not just, just a straight line. It has to follow along the curves of the folds here. So do that and it makes your clothing look a lot more sophisticated and a lot more consistent. So I'm going to be shading this area here. I'm going to make one thick line and one thin line. And that's just because I like that kind of dynamic look. I like thick and then thin right next to it because that's kind of like a little bit of a shape language right there. So fill it in, nicely. Now, of course, this is for those who are doing the same image here. Do whatever you like. As always, I don't like it when, I like it when people learn. So as long as, even if you copy or go, if you end up, basically copying what I do, that's totally fine. As long as you learn something, you're good. However, I ultimately want you guys to learn and make your own creations because that is the most fun for anybody. So if you want, you can copy what I do, but in the end, it's your creativity that matters the most. So feel free to just, do something different and like. So as you can see, thick and then thin right after. It makes it look a lot more interesting and just overall a more appealing thing to look at. So, and it also creates a nice bit of contrast between the skin and the boots that will later be, later be pink. So let's wait for this to dry so we don't accidentally smudge our black or ink. So as you can see, a lot of this is very repetitive, like, black, pink, I know the K-pop group, but, and the reason why I do this is because I want to make sure that these colors match this overall character vibe. So since she's kind of like, sassy and kind of cute, and she has purple and pink hair, I want colors to complement that design. So that's why I chose more of a simple 2 or bi-color choice. So like pink and black. So yeah. And of course, alternating these patterns, maybe putting different shades of pink or different shades of darkness, that helps as well. And of course, we also have other subcategories of colors like yellow. These bells will be yellow, and that can like lead your eye into like different parts of the area, different parts of the drawing that will make you notice like, oh, that's yellow, and this matches throughout the whole image. So repeating colors are helpful, and then having a tertiary color or third color that wraps everything together. So anyways, I'm gonna take a bubblegum pink as a base. So I'm going to once again be coloring very, very lightly. This is going to be kind of like a very cute pink color. So I would say more on the cooler side, more like a hot pink, but lighter version. So once again, make sure everything's pretty nicely evenly colored. Of course, I never like to go super opaque because that will be more prone to mistakes and mess ups. So I always like starting light so I can always go back later. So I'm adding a little bit more color here. Make sure it's quite smooth. Make sure your consistency is good. Make sure that your your pencil markings is pretty even. Then I'm going to go ahead and use a pink and color on top more opaquely. I'm going to press now. And this will show the color a lot better. So right now it's quite grainy, but the more color I put in, the less grainy it will be because there's more surface area being colored in. So I'm putting a little bit of pressure on this just because I want the pink to show up more. Make sure you're using the side of the pencil, by the way. Do not use the tip of the pencil, and it will make the brush, or not the brush, the pencil look very thin. You want to make sure you use the sides of the pencil so that you have an overall a more consistent coloring process. So I use the sides of the pencil. Notice how I'm going in a very similar direction on everything, and that's just to give a consistent texture. So if I just kind of cross-hatch everything and then suddenly started going sideways, it won't look as even and it won't look as neat. So I always like to go one direction first, and then change directions later on the other sides. So it almost kind of feels like a cross-hatching feel. But anyways, so once I'm done with this, I'm going to go ahead and take my bubblegum color again, and just once again, color on top, but this time more opaque this time. So I want to make this quite intense. I don't want to make this kind of like a baby pink. I want this to be like a nice strong pink. So as you can see, the graininess is starting to go away. Well, you can still see a little bit of it, but the farther you go away, the farther you step away from the illustration, the less grainy it looks. Of course, if you want it to be less grainy, just draw bigger. I'm only limited to this size because my camera is only so big. So, just make sure that every bit of the color is nice and even, going in different directions after, first go in one direction, then go another direction in the fully. So it will look smoother that way. So this looks good for now. I like the color base of this. Now we are going to add our mixing color, which is a light color. So I'm going to be using a pale rose. This is a very, very, light color, and this can be used for blending. Actually, let's use a white for this. White is good for blending. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's just color a little bit of white over this. Usually white is a good layering color because it blends everything together that you previously colored in. So just do a light pass of that. And then take your magenta, which is going to be your darker color, and then line by line or section by section, add a little bit of darkness. So I like going every section and shading one side, especially around the ruffle areas. You want to shade in those areas as well. And of course, if there is an arm in front, you want to add a shadow there as well. As you can see, I made a little bit of a mistake there, but it's okay. Don't worry about it. So you can also add other folds in without line work. So this one I didn't have a line work to it. However, I indicated a bit of the folds up here with just the black line. And then I'm filling it back in with the pencil. So as you can see, I'm coloring every section because it's a pleated skirt. Make sure that when you have long folds that they have an origin somewhere. They have an origin from the top, and as it bends down it gets more crinkled. There. And that is the skirt. Now if you want to add a little bit more of a darkness to it, you can go ahead and take a raspberry. This is a very, very dark color for pink, and just kind of put it in the areas of the darkest areas. So areas like, little deep corners near the arm where the most shadow would be held in. You want to add that raspberry color. So as you can see, it kind of gives a nice pop of color. So I like usually adding them around the edges or areas with, kind of like nice ruffly areas, you know, especially around these areas here. I want to make sure that these are seen, so these will be extra dark. But I'm not adding it everywhere, I'm only adding it in specific places. Typically, it usually gets darker around the crotch area. There. I'm going to add a little bit of a gradient from dark to light just to kind of show that, you know, it's kind of 3D object. So I like doing that just for a little bit of interest. So as you can see, the top is black with a bit of accent on the pink. And for the skirt, it's the opposite. So it kind of gives a more interesting look. So now let's go with the belt here. So I feel like the belt is going to be black. So I'm actually, just to make it easier, I'm going to use a thick line here. I'm going to be using a number 1 pen again. And then, but instead of filling everything, I'm only going to fill in some areas. I'm going to make this more of like a shiny, leathery look. So I'm only going to be filling in pockets. I'm going to be filling most of this belt here, except for maybe a little bit at the edges. Maybe give a little bit of highlights around the edge of the belt to kind of show that's a little bit shiny. There. Looks good. And then the emblem in the middle can be pink. So let's wait for that to dry. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and color in the socks. So the socks, I imagine, will be more of a black. However, I want to layer in a little bit of skin tone on there. So what we're first going to do is we are going to put in a raspberry. So the reason why I'm doing raspberry is because I want this to be not completely black. I want this to show a little bit of the skin tone inside of it. So I always like to start with a skin tone first, you know, kind of just lightly, just to kind of hint that, you know, it's kind of a thinner material. So I'm going to be coloring this with a thin coating of raspberry. Don't worry about the cat things here. We can always color over that with our gel pen. So just, you know, color this as a base. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just start layering. So let's first start off with a dark brown. So I'm going to be using a dark, or just going to be using browns here. So I'm going to be taking a light brown, a brown, and then a dark brown. So these will be the colors that I will mainly use for the socks. So I'm just going to be layering on top using a light brown. So this looks weird at first, but trust me, it's going to become a lot more clearer later. This is just building up the colors to just show that this is a thinner material. It's not completely black. Now, if you were doing this digitally, and you want to show, like, you know, skin through the stockings, what you would do is you would first color in the dark, you know, main color of the socks, and then use an airbrush, and then paint in the lighter skin tone on top, and that would kind of make it look like it's thin. But we have to kind of layer this on backwards, because if we start with dark first, if we start with black first, then we can't color on top as well, because it won't be, the light colors won't be able to show very well. So we're first starting off with our, you know, skin tone, our dark skin tones, you know, because black darkens the skin tone here. So you obviously don't want to use a peach for this right now. So once we have that all pretty much filled in, let's go in with our magenta. Actually, no, let me think. Let's go with our orchid. That kind of gives a nice hue. So let's kind of put in our orchid color. This is a purple, and that will kind of start going into more the darker areas. So you can use a circular motion to color this, or you can basically, you know, color any way you want. Just make sure it's nice and consistent. And around the edges, I like to kind of saturate it just a little bit more because it's kind of around the knees. Usually around the knees, you kind of add a little bit of highlight, or not a highlight, but a little bit more pop of color. Okay, so we have our base pretty much done. Now let's go ahead and add our black. Actually, our dark brown, sorry about that. So our dark brown is going to act as a little bit of like our starter black. So I'm going to be drawing in the shadows. And then as we go out, we're going to color, just kind of glaze it a little bit. So as you can see, it's starting to look more like socks once we add the dark brown. Kind of around the edges as well, where the shadows are. So the reason why I don't worry about these cat-like features is because we're going to be drawing over these anyway. If we try to work around them, then it looks messy. However, if we draw on top of them later on, it won't look as messy. So around the tops, add a little bit of gradients here. Add a little bit of, leave a little bit of the color, the skin color behind. So now you have this kind of like nice gradient look. Now let's go ahead and use our black this time, and then kind of just reinforce the darkness here. So I'm putting a medium pressure on this. I'm not putting very heavy pressure. Now continue to leave a pocket of lighter tones. Everything else can be, more concentrated with black. You can even add a little bit of folds if you want. But as you can see, I'm surrounding everything in a very controlled manner. It's not rocket science. It is just more control of your colors. So as you can see, you can make varieties of dark colors using this method. Because black is boring, I mean, of course, black is not boring, but just black alone is boring. You want to mix colors and, explore with different shades of black. There's warm blacks, there's cool blacks, there's multiple kinds. So let's look at this from afar and see the comparison. So as you can see, these actually start looking like stockings that are a little bit thin around the skin area. And that's because we layered on these colors really, really nicely. So I'm going to close in a little bit on the bits of color here, because I don't want them to look kind of like a bulge. I want this to look smooth and nice. So this needs a little bit more smoothing or color integration. Around the edges, you want to make it extra dark because that's where it bends. You want to make a difference on that. So that's what it looks like from far away. It kind of has that nice texture, that nice kind of almost like skin, like kind of thin material look. Now let's go with our whites. So let's take a white, and then let's start coloring in this area here where the color is mostly shining. This is just to blend everything together. So as you can see, it kind of blends everything and makes it a little bit smoother. Now let's add our peach. Oops, our peach here. Let's just add a little bit of that color. Now you won't really be able to see it as much, but because we added, because we left a little bit of the color layer on top, we can see a little bit better now. So as you can see, the peach is popping out a bit more. Kind of surround it in areas, kind of like color around it, color around these areas here. Just kind of make sure it gets everywhere. And even under the black or under the darker layers of colors, you can still see a little bit of what this has done. So this is what it looks like from far away. Now let's go a little bit closer and zoom in. And let's just continue blending in a little bit. So I'm actually going to blend this in just a little bit better because I don't want this to just be, big streaks. It looks kind of ugly that way. So I'm going to actually put a little bit of black on top. There. Now let's take our white gel pen and then draw on top our little kitty pattern. Notice how even in the details, I make sure that my lines follow the form. It's a round surface, so you want to make sure that that is there. Just to make it a little bit extra dark, I'm going to go in with my 1 again, and then just trace in areas that I think need a bit more darkening. Such as, this border here needs darkening. It needs to be a little bit clearer because it's a very bold shape. So I'm making this thicker. I'm also making the crease where the leg, kind of bends, also a little bit darker. So this is the extra dark that you want to rarely use. You don't want to use it all the time. But enough of it, can make a big difference. All right. I think that should be good for this video for now. Let's see what we did so far. We did our skirt and we did our leggings. So far so good, guys. Let's just keep it up. And now we're going to be doing accessories. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.